It's 7 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. Could I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Allred. Billman.
Here.
Fell.
Here.
Fitch.
Here.
Hopkins. Weiskopf. You.
Here. I just saw Allred is joining.
Okay,
That as
Mr.
well.
Allred is here. Thank you. We do have a quorum. So are any communications?
There are none.
Now we have new business is the next item. We have two Champaign County Zoning Board cases. They're very similar. 972 AT20, request by the zoning administrator to add definitions for specified adult use cannabis business only within 1.5 miles of a home rule municipality with more than 20,000 people, which is Champaign and Urbana. And then 973 AT20, a request by the zoning administrator to add provisions for special use cannabis only within 1.5 miles of a home rule municipality with 20,000 or more people, except within 1.5 miles of smaller communities and residential districts, to 3 sections of the Champaign County zoning ordinance. So this is a little more restrictive than the AT. I think this 973 is a little more restricted than 972. And Mr. Hopkins has joined us.
Yes. Okay. So I will take over. Marcus Ricci was unable to attend the meeting tonight, so I will be presenting the case. I know I haven't presented a case to you all for a little bit of time now, so please take it easy on me. Also, before we get started, at the county's Environmental Land Use Committee this past Thursday, the 972 case, 972 AT20, was not recommended to the county board. So that case died at their Environmental Land Use Committee. So tonight, all we're considering is the 973 AT20, which I think, as far as they concerned Urbana's extraterritorial jurisdiction, I think they were pretty much the same, but it just will make this a little bit easier since we don't have to be sort of juggling 2 cases at once. Let's see. John Hall from the county is supposed to join us. I don't see him on here yet, but hopefully he'll be able to join us if you have any more complicated questions about the proposed text amendment. There he is, joining us right now. Welcome, John. Okay, so I will just, I will get right into it. Let me pull up my notes. I don't have like a proper presentation prepared, so you'll just have to bear with me and look at me talk. I do have one slide to show you later of the options, since that seems to make things easy. Okay, so let's just get right to it. So the Champaign County Zoning Administrator is requesting amendments to 3 sections of the county's zoning ordinance to allow adult cannabis uses in certain areas of Champaign County. I'll just call them cannabis uses from here on out. Those, just understand that when I say that, that's non-medical cannabis uses for people 21 and older. So the case before you tonight, again, it's 973 AT20. It would restrict all cannabis uses to within 1.5 miles of a home rule municipality with more than 20,000 people. It would also allow some cannabis uses outside of those extraterritorial jurisdictions. For our purposes tonight, and for Urbana's concern, the stuff that happens outside the 1.5 miles really is not relevant. So we'll just focus on what's within our ETJ. This text amendment, as all county text amendments go, it's of interest to the city of Urbana to the extent that it could affect our zoning and land development decisions within that 1.5 mile extraterritorial jurisdiction. If you'll recall, the city has subdivision and land development jurisdiction within that ETJ, while the county has zoning jurisdiction in that area. So it's important that we try and be consistent between the 2 jurisdictions where the regulations sort of overlap and may conflict. So land uses in the county can affect the city of Urbana in a few different ways. So they can potentially conflict or complement land uses that are within the city. Also, unincorporated portions of the county that are right next to the city or really close to the city are likely to be annexed into the city at some point. So we want to make sure that the land uses on those parcels that could be annexed in the future will be compatible with the city when they are annexed. And also development patterns in areas that are eventually annexed into the city will affect the city's ability to grow according to the vision of our 2005 comprehensive plan and in subsequent comprehensive plans like the one that we are embarking on this year. City staff have concluded that the proposed text amendment would not directly affect the use of land in the city, nor would it affect our ability to manage growth and development. The amendment would permit cannabis uses near land in the city that already permits cannabis uses. It could, or it would also permit some uses by right or with special use permit in some locations near the city that doesn't permit those uses. But in those cases, there are a couple mitigating factors that we think would make those sort of innocuous that I'll speak to in a little bit. So for a little bit of background, I won't go through it all, but just if you'll recall, on June 25th, 2019, Governor Pritzker signed the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which made it legal for people 21 and older to purchase and consume cannabis in Illinois for non-medical purposes. The act regulates how cannabis can be cultivated, transported, processed, and sold. It also restricts the number of dispensaries or points of sale for cannabis in each region of the state. On September of last year, the City Council passed a 3% cannabis retailer's occupation tax, which applies to all sales of cannabis, non-medical cannabis within the city. And then on October 21st, after passing through the Plan Commission, the City Council passed Ordinance 2019-10-059, which added non-medical cannabis uses and regulations to the zoning ordinance. Champaign County is now considering an amendment to its zoning ordinance to establish cannabis uses in the county. And I wanted to make a note that since the county sort of waited until most, if not all, municipalities within the county passed their own cannabis regulations, I think they were really able to craft them to not only meet the needs of the county, but also to sort of respect the regulations that the cities and towns had put into place. So, for instance, in this case, they allow uses around Champaign and Urbana, which both already allow all of the cannabis uses that the state allows. On page 3 of your memo, there's an interesting timeline of the county text amendment. It's interesting, but I won't go through it all here. It's in your memo if you'd like to read it. Except to point out again that just last Thursday, the Environmental Land Use Committee voted to recommend this case 973 AT20 for approval and voted to not recommend 972 AT20. So again, that latter case failed. So tonight, 973 AT20 will go to the county board on June 18th. So next Thursday. For the amendment itself, it would establish sort of a 1.5 mile by right use area for all 6 of the cannabis uses around Urbana and Champaign. So again, both Urbana and Champaign already allow those 6 uses, so this would create this zone where they're allowed out in the county. And the rationale here is to restrict cannabis uses to be closer to the more urban areas of the county, keep them out of the more rural areas of the county. The amendment is broken up into 3 parts. Part A adds definitions for the 6 uses, which mirror the state regulations, and also which mirror Urbana's definitions as we mirror the state definitions. Part B adds requirements for adult use cannabis businesses within 1.5 miles of a home rule municipality with more than 20,000 population. So that's Champaign and Urbana. Part C adds requirements to areas that are outside of those of Champaign and Urbana's ETJ. So it's not really relevant to the discussion tonight, so I won't go into that. So similar to the city cannabis regulations, this amendment would prohibit dispensaries, cultivation centers, or craft growers to be close to one another. So there would be separation between those uses. So dispensaries from dispensaries, cultivation centers from cultivation centers, and same with craft growers. Also, it would require separation between dispensaries and certain schools. It would permit cultivation centers or craft growers in non-residential districts by right. And as in Urbana, it would require cultivation centers and craft growers to use air filtration, ventilation, scrubbers, and such. And the county goes beyond what the city would require. And they also would require cultivation centers and craft growers to control their lighting at night. And then, like the city, the county would also permit multiple cannabis uses on the same premises under specific situations. So like we had discussed, a dispensary with a craft grower, which is something the state allows. So they would allow similar uses like that too. One thing I found interesting is that their proposed amendment would permit consumption of cannabis in a dispensary if it's within the ETJ of a home rule municipality that allows consumption of cannabis at a dispensing organization. Now, currently, nobody allows that, but I think this is a good way to sort of future-proof this so that if, say, Urbana decides that in the next, couple of years we want to allow consumption at dispensaries, then de facto this rule would already be in the county zoning ordinance, so that would also be allowed within the ETJ. So our staff compared the proposed text amendment and permitted use maps from the county case with the City of Urbana's cannabis regulations and our permitted use maps. And we do not anticipate any negative impacts to the city's ability to plan or manage growth or development from the proposed text amendment based on the analysis. Starting on page 5 of your memo, you can see the analyses of each cannabis use with respect to the compatibility with city land uses and our ability to manage growth and development in the ETJ. I'm not going to go through each of those. I'd be happy to entertain a discussion about those if you have specific things you want to talk about. The proposed text amendment is generally consistent with many of the city's goals and objectives from our comprehensive plan. You can read the list on pages 7 and 8 of your memo. The amendment would allow the most resource-intensive cannabis uses adjacent to municipalities that already have infrastructure in place to serve those uses. And then it would also permit cannabis growers, so craft growers and cultivation centers and transporters throughout the county, as those are sort of less resource intensive uses. So the amendment does not directly affect the use of land within the city's boundaries, of course, nor does it affect the city's ability to manage growth and development. Again, it would permit cannabis uses near land in the city that already permits cannabis uses. And then in some instances, it would allow some uses by right or with a special use permit in locations near areas in the city that wouldn't permit those uses. But as I alluded to in the opening, there are a couple of pretty strong checks and balances on allowing those uses in those areas. So the first is that if there's a special use permit application, the city would be notified and we would review through the Plan Commission and City Council. We would review those applications and submit comments to the county board prior to their decision. And then I think more importantly is that if there's a new cannabis use that needs to create a new connection to the Urbana-Champaign sanitary district's sanitary sewers, they would be required to enter into an annexation agreement with the city if they're within the ETJ. And that would serve really to make sure that those developers would work with the city to find land in an area that's suitable and compatible to having cannabis use in that area. I do also want to point out that when we came up with our cannabis regulations, we identified certain areas that are right outside of our border, something in like the east side of High Cross Road that's currently in the county, and it's zoned ag. So we added for cultivation centers, we thought that somebody might want to say put a cultivation center over there. So we allow cultivation in ag zones with a special use permit. So we were already contemplating sort of what happens if somebody wants to put some cannabis uses right outside of our border and has to, and would have to have an annexation agreement and then, probably actually be annexed into the city immediately. So we sort of already built some of those into our own regulations. So again, in summary, the proposed amendment is generally compatible with the city's adopted cannabis zoning amendment. We do not anticipate any negative impact to the city's ability to plan or manage growth or development as a result of the amendment. I will, let's see, can I share my screen here? Okay, let's, so the options that you have here are, number one, you can defeat a resolution of protest. That's what staff recommends. So these cases are always funny because you're voting to defeat something if you agree with it. So do that if you think the text amendment will not negatively affect the city's ability to manage growth and development within the ETJ. Apologize for the double negative. It seemed kind of hard to write it otherwise. Number two is the same thing, but you can add specific provisions. And then number three would be recommending, sorry, these are all recommendations to council, of course. Number three would be recommending the approval of a resolution of protest. And that would be, if you think this will affect our ability to manage growth and development, you want council to say, we don't agree with this. That is the option you would use. Again, I can take questions. John Hall is here if you have more specific questions about the amendment itself.
Yes, are there any questions for Mr. Garcia? If there are, either raise your hand, figuratively with Zoom or just motion. Mr. Fell.
Kevin, can you touch, if you know a little bit, or maybe this is John's area, the part of it, well, it's in the finding that said it includes required separation distances between some proposed cannabis uses. So what uses are required to have a distance? And part of my question is why? Because I would think some of these uses want to be next to each other just for ease of operation. So I'm just wondering why we have this separation of uses and who has to separate from who?
Yeah, I will defer to John here in a second. I think maybe the way that was worded in the memo is a little odd, but I think what we were trying to say is that like dispensaries can't be close to other dispensaries and cultivation centers can't be close to other cultivation centers. But compatible uses, I think, could be close to each other. But John, do you want to weigh in on that?
Mr. Hall, I think I unmuted you, but if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, no, I'm not talking. No.
Oh, it said Mr. Hall.
Oh, I thought you said Mr. Bell. Okay.
No.
Sorry.
Kevin asked him a question.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. The only separations required in this amendment are separations that are part of state requirements. I think those primarily deal with dispensaries being a certain distance from other dispensaries and cultivation centers being not near other cultivation centers. And then your own cannabis amendment had some separations to schools from I think dispensaries from schools. And so we incorporated those because the direction we got from the county board was if a municipality requires it, they have experience and that's what they think is necessary. So we want our amendment to incorporate the same separations. We didn't add any other separations. This is such a complex amendment. I'm sorry, Mr. Fell, I can't remember all the separations, but I do know that we didn't add any separations that are not already a part of the state rules or a part of Urbana's ordinance.
That's the answer I wanted. So thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand the mitigating ideas here. When we have the right to provide comments on a county board special use permit, what is the effect of our comments?
That's a good question, and I'm going by memory here. I think for special use permits, they will just accept the comments and take them into consideration. I don't think it rises to the level of like in this case where we could have a resolution of protest, which would require a supermajority vote. I'm not sure if John knows how that works. I could look that up in the zoning ordinance real quick as well.
Kevin, am I online again?
You are, yes.
Yes, comments with county board special use permit are just that. They're comments. They do not have the weight of, for example, a protest for a map amendment. That's one of the difficulties in trying to make compatible regulations. Our special use permits are not a change in zoning. They're simply a special use permit. And so providing for a municipal protest is always a difficult thing. So it's simply comments.
Okay. So second question is the comment about needing sewer extension and therefore annexation agreements. I'm trying to remember what prompts the sewer extension requirement. So let me frame the specifics here. As I see it, the use by right opportunities east of Urbana are for cultivation and craft growers. And it's not clear to me that either of those needs a sewer extension or that either of those requires a subdivision. And therefore, it's not clear to me what would prompt the need, either technologically or legally, for an annexation agreement.
So our subdivision and land development code says that if you're within, I believe it's 250 feet of an existing sanitary sewer, you have to tap into the sanitary sewer. So that's, I mean, that is kind of a relatively small distance. But if somebody wanted to put a cultivation center say on the east side of High Cross Road there on one of those agricultural parcels, they'd likely want to or have to tap into the sanitary sewer.
Because,
Well, I think that these uses have a need for discharging a bit of water, although I do know the state requires them to sort of recirculate as much water as possible. So maybe they're not as water intensive as one might think, at least for water coming out of the use. And I'm not sure if I answered your question in full.
well, I think what I wanted to be clear on is it does not appear to me that the two mitigating items are actually very strong. It may not matter if we aren't that concerned about the implications, but I'm skeptical of the notion that either of these is a strong deterrent.
Any further questions, Mr. Hopkins?
No,
Okay. Further questions? Mr. Allred?
So kind of going off this, what would be the alternative sort of approach to controlling these uncompatible uses from occurring? I'm trying to remember, did council end up imposing a buffer on residential uses?
Yes, let me pull up I have the ordinance pulled up. I believe it's
The 300?
it's within 300 feet of
Yeah.
residentially zoned property. Let's see. Oh, where's that? Okay. Yeah, so a special use permit is required to establish a cannabis cultivation center or craft grower on a parcel whose property line is within 300 feet of any residentially zoned lot in the city of Urbana, Champaign, or Champaign County, or in the B3U or MOR district.
And so does the county ordinance also incorporate that?
I believe they added those same buffers. Is that right, John?
Yes.
Anything further, Mr. Allred?
No, that's it.
Further questions for Mr. Garcia or Mr. Hall? Mr. Hopkins?
I want to get clarification on what was just said. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm looking at the right one. Okay. On page 33, for transporting organization, and I think this appears in multiple cases, right? This is the one I happen to have marked. B3 on the right-hand side shall not be located less than 1.5 miles from any residential zoning district. Okay, so I think I figured it out. The less than 1.5 miles applies in the county, but not in the mile and a half. But the 300 feet does apply in the mile and a half. Okay. I think I answered my own question.
Yeah, so I think that would be just to point out, that would be consistent with what council adopted in our ordinance. So again, pointing to those parcels on the east side of High Cross Road, we had identified those as potentially suitable for cultivation, but added that 300-foot buffer. So since the county's proposed amendment also respects that 300-foot buffer, anything over on that east side there that was within the buffer that we had established would also be within their special use permit buffer.
Further questions for Mr. Garcia? Okay, thank you, Mr. Garcia and Mr. Hall. I don't believe we have any public other than Mr. Hall. So I think we can go past the public input section of the hearing and go into discussion. Is there any issues that people want to discuss? Looks pretty quiet out there in Zoom land. So is there any motions, you know, jumping past public input, jumping past discussion? Anybody want to move it? Come on. Ms. you want to do it, I can tell.
This kind is tricky when it comes to county. So I'm going to let someone else to do it.
Well, I can move it. I usually don't, but
I'll do it.
all right.
So
Mr. Hopkins.
I move that we send CC ZBA -973-AT-20 to City Council with a recommendation to defeat a motion of protest.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins,
Second.
second by Mr. Fell. Is there any discussion at this time? Okay, in that case, let's have a roll call vote and make sure that if you're not unmuted, that either you mute yourself or, there we go. I think everybody's unmuted. Okay, roll call, please.
Allred,
Yes.
Billman,
Yes.
Fell,
Yes.
Fitch,
Yes.
Hopkins,
Yes.
Weiskopf, you.
Yes.
That motion passes. Is there a city council date? I assume there's one looming, and that's why we had a special meeting.
There is, right. It's going to a special city council meeting this coming Monday, the 15th.
Great, thank you. We don't have any audience participation that I know of. Does anybody, Mr. Hall, care to say anything else? Apparently not. So in that case, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.